They say walls win wars, but history quietly disagrees. Again and again, tiny garrisons outsmarted massive armies with one trick. Not bigger cannons, not thicker walls, but ridiculous creativity under pressure. From fake wooden horses to ships dragged over mountains at night. From flooded countrysides to gliders landing on top of invincible forts. Some cities survived by starving in silence, others by faking abundance. Sometimes one bribed guard mattered more than thousands of armored soldiers. By the end, you won't look at castles the same way. So, ready to see the siege tricks that actually worked? Trojan Horse ruse lets Greeks finally capture walled Troy. A fake wooden gift ended a decade of stalemated war. Outside Troy, weary Greek armies pretended to sail away at dawn. They left a towering horse, supposedly an offering to Athena. Trojan priests and citizens argued loudly about its real purpose. One priest warned them, saying the Greeks might be tricking everyone. Instead, many Trojans dragged the horse through their proud gates. Hidden inside, Greek commandos waited silently until the city slept. At night, they climbed out, killed guards, and opened Troy's doors. The returning fleet rushed in behind them, and Troy finally burned. Mehmed Bagi drags Ottoman warships overland into Constantinople. A city that shrugged off crusades finally fell to sliding ships. In the 15th century, Sultan Mehmed II surrounded Constantinople by land. The Byzantine defenders trusted their mighty harbor chain across the Golden Horn. Ottoman galleys could not break through, so Mehmed changed direction entirely. His engineers laid greased wooden rails over the steep Galata hills. At night, soldiers and oxen hauled warships over solid ground. By dawn, Byzantine lookouts saw Ottoman masts already inside their harbor. The surprise flanking move crushed morale and split the city's defense lines. With walls attacked from every side, Constantinople finally became Istanbul. Alexander builds a stone causeway through the sea to Tyre. Tyre's proud island walls suddenly mattered less once the sea disappeared. Alexander the Great needed that Phoenician port during his eastern campaign. Tyre's main city sat offshore, ringed by defenses and strong fleets. Rather than just wait, Alexander ordered engineers to literally move landward. They dumped stone, rubble, and timber into the shallow channel each day. Under Tyrian arrows and fireships, the causeway inched relentlessly closer. Siege towers rolled forward on the new strip, hammering the seawalls. After months of grinding progress, Macedonian troops finally stormed the breaches. The artificial land bridge stayed, permanently turning Tyre's island into peninsula. Caesar's double siege walls trapped Vercingetorix's army at Alesia. One Gallic stronghold ended up besieged from both directions at once. Julius Caesar cornered Vercingetorix at Alesia during the Gallic Wars. The Gauls had a hilltop fortress, cavalry, and hope for reinforcements. Instead of simply storming it, Caesar ordered a massive surrounding fortification. His legions built miles of ditches, palisades, and traps facing inward. Then they built another ring of defenses facing outward against relief armies. When a huge Gallic rescue force arrived, it attacked the outer wall. At the same time, Vercingetorix's warriors charged from the fortress inside. The Roman double ring held, crushing both forces and ending Gallic resistance. Archimedes' war machines cripple Roman fleet at Siege of Syracuse. For a while, one mathematician turned Syracuse into Rome's worst nightmare. During Rome's war against Carthage, the city of Syracuse switched sides. The Roman navy arrived expecting another routine coastal siege with catapults. Inside the walls, Archimedes had designed oversized artillery and strange cranes. Huge stone throwers smashed ships from far beyond normal catapult range. Closer in, claw-like grapples lifted prows, then dropped vessels suddenly sideways. Roman soldiers watched hulls crack open while crews panicked in the harbor. Stories later exaggerated mirrors burning ships, but the real machines sufficed. Only after a long blockade and betrayal did Rome finally capture Syracuse. Romans raise a giant ramp to assault Masada's cliff fortress. A desert mesa that seemed untouchable eventually met a patient ramp. After the Jewish revolt, Roman forces hunted rebels holding Masada in Judea. The fortress sat high on cliffs above the Dead Sea's shoreline. Direct assault up the steep rock faces looked suicidal for Roman infantry. Instead, engineers conscripted local labor and built an enormous earthen ramp. Day after day, baskets of rubble crept upward under defending missiles. Eventually, siege towers and rams rolled to wall height on solid ground. According to ancient sources, the defenders chose mass suicide over capture. The ramp still scars the landscape, showing how slowly Rome solved problems. Byzantine Greek fire incinerates enemy ships outside besieged Constantinople. Sometimes the best city walls are liquid and on fire. Medieval Arab and Bulgar fleets learned this the hard way near Constantinople. The Byzantine navy carried siphon-equipped ships spraying a mysterious burning mixture. Once lit, the substance reportedly clung to hulls and even water. As attackers rode close, defenders unleashed jets that turned decks into furnaces. Ships collided while crews panicked, spreading flame instead of boarding defenses. The exact recipe stayed a tightly guarded state secret for centuries. Rival powers tried to copy it, but never fully matched Byzantine results. Greek fire's terror helped Constantinople outlast repeated sieges from stronger neighbors. Roman troops crawl through Veii sewers and open the gates. Rome's future empire almost died nearby, then saved itself through plumbing. Before ruling the Mediterranean, Rome struggled against the wealthy Etruscan Veii. Veii's hilltop walls and allies made a straight assault expensive and bloody. Roman engineers noticed the city's drainage tunnels emptying outside the defenses. They quietly expanded one channel large enough for armored men to crawl. A picked group slipped through the darkness and surfaced inside Veii's streets. While main forces attacked the walls, the infiltrators rushed to the gates. They killed startled guards, unbarred the doors, and let legions pour in. The fall of Veii became an early template for Roman siege cunning. Crusaders bribe a guard to swing open Antioch's city gate. Sometimes 1,000-mile pilgrimages hinge on one well-timed night bribe. During the First Crusade, European knights reached the huge Syrian city Antioch. Its walls bristled with towers, and starvation gnawed inside the Crusader camp. Rather than launch another bloody assault, leaders looked for someone corruptible inside. They contacted an Armenian guard named Firuz, reportedly disgruntled with his superiors. After negotiations, Firuz agreed to let a small group scale his tower. On a stormy night, Crusaders climbed ladders, reached the battlements, and entered. They overpowered nearby garrison troops and quickly unbarred Antioch's main gate. The city fell in chaos, proving that money sometimes beats siege engines. Persians scale an unclimbable cliff path to capture Sardis. One supposedly impossible rock face became a secret stairway for invaders. Sardis, capital of Lydia, sat on a high acropolis in Anatolia. Legend says King Croesus relied heavily on cliffs guarding one side. During later wars, a Persian soldier watched a defender drop his helmet. The man climbed down a hidden path to retrieve it safely. That night, he led colleagues up the narrow route toward the walls. Persian troops appeared where no attack was expected and scaled the defenses. Guards concentrated elsewhere, leaving that sector thinly manned and quickly overrun. The story became a warning against trusting cliffs more than patrols. Alexander's sky climber seized the sheer fortress of Sogdian Rock. Here, Alexander supposedly conquered a fortress by asking for volunteers with courage. High in Central Asia, Sogdian Rock rose like a vertical island. Local rebels believed its cliffs and winter snow made it unassailable. When they taunted Alexander, he reportedly promised to capture it anyway. He asked experienced climbers from his army to scale the icy walls. Using tent pegs and ropes, they inched up dangerous routes at night. By morning, Macedonian soldiers appeared on the heights above the defenders. Seeing enemy troops somehow behind them, many inside reportedly surrendered without fighting. Whether embellished or not, the episode reinforced Alexander's psychological warfare reputation. Gibraltar's defenders, blast besiegers with cannons inside the rock. During one siege, attackers discovered the cliffs themselves could shoot back. In the 18th century, Spanish and French forces tried to retake Gibraltar. British defenders perched on a steep limestone promontory above the narrow isthmus. They wanted artillery firing along the slope, but gun positions seemed impossible. An artillery officer suggested digging tunnels and mounting cannons inside the rock. Workers carved galleries, then cut openings that overlooked the besiegers' lines below. Guns fired from cool, protected caverns, hard to silence with counter-battery fire. Exploding shot and grape shot raked enemy trenches and floating batteries in front. Those rock-cut galleries later expanded, becoming part of Gibraltar's tourist attractions today. Viennese bakers hear Ottoman tunnelers and save Vienna's city walls. Here, early morning bread makers arguably mattered more than cannons or cavalry. During an Ottoman siege of Vienna, sappers tunneled beneath the city defenses. Defenders worried about underground mines that could blow huge breaches open. Legend says bakers working before dawn heard faint scraping under their cellars. They alerted soldiers who started countermines and raids into the Ottoman tunnels. Several mines were reportedly flooded or exploded prematurely, ruining careful engineering work. Those failures slowed assault plans and helped Vienna hold until reinforcements approached. Whether detail is accurate, the story celebrates ordinary city residents listening carefully. Either way, the Ottomans failed to capture Vienna, reshaping European frontiers. Dutch flood their own countryside to break the siege of Leiden. To save one city, the Dutch literally drowned their backyard. In the 16th century, Spanish forces besieged the rebellious Dutch city Leiden. Leiden's population starved, eating whatever they could while walls held barely. The Dutch leadership decided to open dikes protecting the low-lying countryside. Seawater slowly flooded fields, villages, and roads surrounding the Spanish positions. Shallow draft relief boats then sailed over former farmland toward the besieged city. As the waters rose, Spanish camps became untenable, and troops withdrew hurriedly. The arriving flotilla brought food, breaking months of hunger inside Leiden's walls. That engineered flood later helped strengthen Dutch identity as masters of water. Cortés builds lake warships to surround and strangle Tenochtitlan, The island capital that once seemed untouchable became a trap instead. Hernán Cortés returned to the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan after earlier dramatic clashes. The city sat in Lake Texcoco, connected by long causeways with bridges. Spanish forces and indigenous allies wanted to cut supplies and isolate defenders. Cortés ordered brigantines built inland, then hauled in pieces to the lake. There, carpenters reassembled them into sailing gunboats armed with cannon and crossbows. These ships patrolled canals, attacked canoes, and supported assaults along the causeways. Slowly, famine, disease, and constant pressure wore down Emperor Cuauhtémoc's remaining fighters. When Tenochtitlan finally fell, control of the lake had made conquest possible. British troops scaled steep nighttime cliffs to capture Quebec City. New France effectively collapsed after one risky climb above a river. During the 7 Years' War, British forces eyed Quebec City's strong defenses. French commanders trusted high cliffs along the St. Lawrence as natural ramparts. General James Wolfe decided to land troops upriver under cover of darkness. His soldiers quietly scaled a narrow, steep path up the heights. By sunrise, British battalions stood on the Plains of Abraham outside Quebec. The French army, surprised to see enemies behind them, rushed into battle. A brutal fight left both generals mortally wounded, but the British victorious. Quebec's fall opened the St. Lawrence and shifted North America's future. Union sappers blow a giant crater beneath Petersburg's Confederate lines. Here, an incredible explosion created an opening that attackers then completely wasted. During the American Civil War, Union forces faced Confederates near Petersburg, Virginia. A Pennsylvania regiment made of coal miners proposed tunneling under enemy positions. Working in secret, they dug a mine shaft toward a key salient. They packed underground chambers with gunpowder, then detonated it before dawn. The blast hurled earth skyward, obliterating Confederate troops and creating a crater. Union soldiers then rushed forward but funneled straight into the deep pit. Instead of going around, many scrambled downward and became trapped under fire. The failed follow-up turned a brilliant engineering success into a tragic failure. Japanese attackers tunnel under Port Arthur's forts and detonate huge mines. At Port Arthur, the ground itself eventually erupted beneath Russian defenses. During the Russo-Japanese War, Japan besieged the heavily fortified Manchurian port. Russian guns on surrounding hills dominated approaches and inflicted terrible casualties. Japanese engineers responded with extensive trench networks creeping ever closer uphill. From those trenches, specialized teams began driving deep mines under key forts. They packed the galleries with explosives, then timed blasts for coordinated assaults. Massive explosions shattered fortifications, throwing debris and defenders into the air. Infantry rushed forward to seize the ruined positions and surrounding trenches. Those brutal mines helped Japan eventually force Russia to surrender the stronghold. German glider troops land on Eben Emael's roof and disable the fortress. Belgium's pride in an invulnerable fort evaporated in less than an hour. On the eve of invading France, Germany needed bridges over the Meuse. Belgian fortress Eben Emael sat above them, armed with heavy guns. Instead of bombing repeatedly, planners chose a silent airborne commando strike. Gliders carried assault teams that landed directly on the fort's broad roof. Using shaped charges, they destroyed turrets and observation posts from point-blank range. Garrison troops were stunned to find enemies already inside their supposed sanctuary. Within hours, most guns were disabled, and bridges remained intact for invasion. The success advertised how gliders and small teams could neutralize massive fortifications. Berlin Airlift uses cargo planes to defeat the Soviet blockade. A post-war city surrounded by enemies survived thanks to constant roaring engines. After World War II, Berlin was divided among powers inside Soviet-controlled territory. When tensions spiked, Soviet authorities cut ground access to West Berlin. Rather than concede, the United States and Allies organized a massive airlift. Cargo planes landed every few minutes, bringing coal, food, and medicine. Pilots learned precise approaches, even dropping candy parachutes for waiting children. Crews flew in harsh winter weather, fog, and around constant political tension. Despite predictions of failure, the operation kept the city functioning for months. Eventually, the Soviets lifted the blockade, realizing the air bridge would continue. Defenders hurl beehives from castle walls to smash attacking siege ladders. If rocks hurt attackers, imagine what angry bees could accomplish. Throughout medieval Europe, castle defenders improvised with whatever painful surprises they had. Chroniclers mention hives or baskets of bees dropped onto soldiers climbing ladders. Armor protected skins somewhat, but faces, necks, and gaps remained exposed. A smashed hive could send thousands of insects swirling through tight-packed ranks. Panicked men let go, fell backward, and tangled others trying to climb. Defenders sometimes used similar tactics with hornets, quicklime, or boiling unpleasant mixtures. These tricks rarely won sieges alone, but bought time and psychological advantage. The stories survive mainly because they are both practical and darkly comic. Medieval engineers build wooden hoardings to rain arrows safely over the parapets. Sometimes the scariest part of a wall is the part hanging outward. Medieval stone battlements offered protection but had blind spots just below them. Attackers could hug the base, set fires, or start mining freely. To answer this, defenders added wooden galleries called hoardings to the ramparts. These projected over the walls, with floor openings and arrow slits. Archers could shoot straight down or drop stones and unpleasant substances. Because they were wooden, hoardings could be dismantled in peacetime for safety. Later, some castles upgraded to permanent stone projections called machicolations. Either way, the goal was simple, making the base a deadly zone. Hungry defenders. Drive cattle outside the walls to fake plenty of food. Sometimes surviving a siege means convincing the enemy you are not starving. Chroniclers describe several towns so desperate they resorted to theatrical food tricks. In one famous example, defenders reportedly herded their last animals outside. They let the beasts graze casually within view of besieging forces. Some accounts even mention tossing bread or grain over the walls. The message was clear: we have enough food to waste publicly. Outside, commanders sometimes reconsidered, fearing a long siege would outlast their supplies. In reality, defenders might be down to scraping kettles and boiling leather. These desperate performances show that morale games mattered as much as rations. Mongol siege engineers build massive trebuchets to shatter once untouchable city walls. Nomadic horsemen did not ride around walls, they learned to erase them. During campaigns against Chinese and Islamic cities, Mongol Khans embraced siege technology. They recruited engineers from conquered regions, especially experienced Chinese and Persian specialists. These teams built giant counterweight trebuchets capable of hurling huge stone projectiles. At cities like Xiangyang, such machines reportedly shattered towers and masonry walls. Combined with relentless archery and psychological terror, heavy artillery broke stubborn resistance. Some defenders were so impressed they later served Mongol rulers as siege experts. The empire's speed plus imported engineering made once secure fortresses suddenly vulnerable. It is a reminder that mobile armies can quickly learn heavy technology. Knights at Orléans use night sorties to burn English siege works. Sometimes the best defense is slipping out and torching the attacker's backyard. During the 100 Years' War, English forces surrounded the French city Orléans. Their ring of forts and earthworks threatened to choke communication and supplies. Defenders, including the force later joined by Joan of Arc, refused passivity. They launched sudden sorties, hitting isolated English positions under darkness or weather. These raids burned wooden palisades, supplies, and several key riverside bastilles. Each destroyed strongpoint loosened the noose and boosted morale inside the city. The combination of bold sorties and symbolism eventually forced the English withdrawal. Scots at Stirling Castle undermine a tower and collapse it onto besiegers. Here, defenders literally dropped part of their own castle onto the enemy. Stirling Castle in Scotland guarded a strategic crossing between highlands and lowlands. During one medieval siege, English forces built a huge wooden siege tower. The structure threatened the walls, rolling forward slowly under covering fire. Rather than batter it from above, Scots reportedly started digging underneath. They tunneled toward the tower's path, propping the passage with weak supports. When the machine approached, they removed timbers, collapsing ground and tower together. The sudden crash destroyed the expensive engine and stunned watching attackers. It is a neat reversal, using mining offensively instead of defensively. Defenders at Malta hide aircraft in caves to survive relentless Axis bombardment. On Malta, simply keeping a few planes alive became a daily miracle. During World War II, the Axis tried to neutralize this Mediterranean island. Its airfields threatened supply routes to North Africa, so bombing was constant. British and Commonwealth crews had only a handful of precious fighters available. To protect them, ground crews hid aircraft inside caves and blast shelters. Planes were rolled out briefly to fight, then hurried back under cover. Mechanics worked in cramped underground spaces, repairing battle damage by lamplight. Despite immense raids, the island kept enough aircraft flying to harass convoys. Russian troops at Sevastopol turned coastal guns inland against German siege lines. At Sevastopol, artillery built for sea battles became deadly landward surprise. During the war, Axis armies laid siege to Sevastopol in Crimea. Many batteries were originally designed to fire at enemy ships offshore. As German forces closed, Soviet crews depressed barrels to hit targets. Some huge guns sat in armored turrets, impossible to knock out completely. Their long range let defenders strike columns, artillery positions, and assembly areas. German command eventually brought super heavy guns and dive bombers to silence the forts. Even so, the redirected coastal artillery delayed the capture for many months. It showed how fixed defenses could improvise once the front shifted inland. Leningrad's road of life keeps the besieged city supplied. A frozen lake became the only lifeline for a starving metropolis. During World War II, German and Finnish forces encircled Leningrad for years. Rail and road links were cut, leaving civilians trapped with dwindling food. Soviet planners realized nearby Lake Ladoga offered a dangerous but possible route. In warmer months, small boats, barges, and ferries crossed under artillery fire. In winter, trucks used ice routes locals called the Road of Life. Defenders at Vienna, stuff cannon with scrap iron for devastating blasts. In Vienna, almost anything metal became ammunition when resources ran thin. During sieges, defenders often lacked enough proper cannonballs for prolonged bombardments. Rather than let guns fall silent, gunners loaded whatever heavy fragments existed. Scrap chains, nails, broken tools, and metal junk all went down barrels. At close range, this turned cannon into huge improvised shotguns. Attackers clustered at breaches or behind mantlets suddenly faced storms of debris. Reports from Vienna and other sieges describe massive casualties from such blasts. The trick damaged barrels faster, but bought precious time at decisive moments. It underlines how quickly warfare turns household objects into lethal projectiles. Ancient defenders stretch rawhide and soak it to absorb battering blows. Not every clever defense was mechanical, some were simply very wet. When battering rams pounded gates, wood alone could splinter or catch fire. Some defenders layered thick rawhide over doors, towers, or vulnerable beams. Before assaults, they soaked these hides thoroughly so water filled the fibers. Under impact, the wet material flexed and absorbed part of each strike. Flaming arrows or fire pots also struggled to ignite saturated organic layers. Combined with sand, clay, or earth, these coverings blunted battering devices significantly. Ancient authors mention similar treatments on siege towers to resist defensive flames. The approach shows how simple materials could outthink expensive wooden machinery. Samurai at Ueda Castle use feigned retreats to humiliate Tokugawa. At Ueda, a smaller clan repeatedly made a future shogun look foolish. During Japan's Sengoku period, Sanada clan held Ueda Castle against Tokugawa forces. Tokugawa Hidetada's army greatly outnumbered the defenders and expected a quick victory. Sanada Masayuki responded with tricks, including opening gates to invite attacks. His warriors would charge out, fight, then pretend to fall back chaotically. Tokugawa troops pursued, only to be ambushed in approaches and river crossings. Confusion multiplied as drumming, shouting, and sudden arrow fire hit disordered lines. After heavy losses and little progress, Tokugawa withdrew without taking the castle. The embarrassment supposedly contributed to his late arrival at the decisive Sekigahara. Chinese defenders at Xiangyang build paddle wheel ships to counter Mongol river blockade. At Xiangyang, a clever river navy briefly held back a land empire. During the Song-Yuan transition, Mongol forces struggled to capture this city complex. Control of the Han River meant controlling supply lines into central China. Mongols built a blockade fleet, but Song engineers answered with paddle wheel warships. These vessels used human-powered wheels along the sides to move quickly upstream. They could maneuver against the current, ram enemy craft, and support forts. For a time, this mobility frustrated Mongol attempts to cut supplies completely. Eventually, the Mongols imported their own specialist fleets and tightened the noose. Still, Xiangyang's river tactics show how naval innovation can delay conquest. Defenders at Osaka Castle use fire arrows to ignite enemy siege towers. At Osaka, towering engines meant to impress instead turned into massive bonfires. During Toyotomi Tokugawa conflict, Osaka Castle stood as the last major resistance. Tokugawa Ieyasu's forces built large wooden towers to approach the formidable walls. These structures carried gunners and archers, threatening to dominate the ramparts. Defenders stocked flaming arrows, bundles of kindling, and containers of flammable oils. When towers rolled closer, coordinated volleys targeted vulnerable joints and coverings. Once fire caught, drafts inside the tall frames turned them into chimneys. Burning debris rained down on attacking troops, scattering formations around the machines. The spectacle underscored how impressive siege hardware could become a liability. City under siege rings, church bells to mask sounds of mining. When digging can kill you, even music becomes a form of armor. Siege warfare often involved tunneling under walls to collapse sections suddenly. Defenders tried to detect this by listening for faint scraping underground. But once their own miners started counter-tunnels, noise became a liability. Some accounts describe cities ringing bells or playing loud music during digging. The constant sound made it harder for besiegers to pinpoint excavation efforts. Meanwhile, defenders could still coordinate signals through predetermined patterns or pauses. In medieval streets, bells also reinforced a sense of solidarity and resistance. It is an example of sound management becoming part of city defense. Besieged towns light extra campfires to convince enemies of reinforcement armies. If you cannot grow your army, you can fake its shadows. Throughout history, commanders have used lighting tricks to exaggerate their strength. Besieged towns sometimes built many more campfires than their numbers required. Fires were placed on hills, behind walls, and along visible ridges. From a distance, scouts reported what looked like large, fresh forces arriving. In some cases, defenders marched small groups noisily between different fire lines. The goal was simple: encourage attackers to overestimate resistance and delay assaults. Sometimes this bought enough time for real allies to gather or negotiate. Even when discovered, such deceptions showed that information itself was another battlefield. Desperate defenders launch nighttime fire rafts downriver to burn enemy bridges. When you cannot reach a bridge directly, sometimes the river can help. In various river sieges, defenders upstream faced temporary bridges and pontoons downstream. Those structures let besiegers move troops and supplies, tightening the encirclement steadily. Defenders responded by building rafts loaded with pitch, brush, and other flammables. They waited for night, favorable wind, and rising water levels. Then they set the rafts ablaze and released them into the current. With luck, burning masses slammed into bridge supports or moored boats nearby. Even partial damage forced attackers to rebuild under threat, slowing operations considerably. Such watery arson shows how geography could be weaponized against overconfident besiegers. Fortress garrison sends captured deserter to feed false information to besieging army. Sometimes the effective weapon leaving a fortress is just one believable person. Siege narratives occasionally mention staged desertions used as deliberate misinformation tools. A defender pretends to flee, then allows himself to be taken prisoner. During interrogation, he shares crafted stories about hunger, disease, and collapsing morale. Officers outside start believing the fortress is just days from surrender. Commanders might relax blockades, postpone assaults, or redirect troops elsewhere prematurely. Meanwhile, garrison uses breathing room to stockpile, repair, or plan escapes. Such ploys are risky because the captured man must sound convincingly frightened.